Is this the week that changes everything? Hi, everybody. Welcome to Smarter News. Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. We get you prepped and ready for the week ahead. We appreciate all of our insiders that are joining us live. And if you're curious about doing that, please go ahead and check out scoop.smarternews.com. This is just one way that you can support Smarter News. We like to keep ourselves as ad-free, as independent as possible in this sort of day and age where it feels like there's so many interests infiltrating the news. So one of the ways that we do this is have this small group of insiders that really matter to us and join our broadcast live. And we just had a 15-minute conversation before the show. It's our before show. It's always sort of fascinating. I shouldn't say sort of, it is. We talked about all sorts of things, from margaritas to salt rooms to allergies to actual news. We did a lot. So love our insiders. Thank you for those that are joining us live. And I asked that question. I know it's a question that could really take place at the beginning of any week. Is this the week that changes everything? But in this particular week, there's some news items that we're considering that it feels like there's a before and an after. There's a before Artemis II and there's an after Artemis II. There's a before a legal precedent for social media companies that was set last week, and then there's the after. And there's a question about the after effects of it. There's, before what's happening with the war in Iran and potentially what's going to happen after. We don't know if the war could conclude this week. I'm not suggesting that, but it does seem like there's a lot of different options on the table. So we're going to tackle some of these bigger themes in the news this week and get you prepped and ready before what will be a holiday weekend going into Easter weekend, the first weekend of April. It's hard to believe that we're already here. On your screen, for those of you joining us on YouTube, but those of you joining us on podcasts, I know I can just say shark and you have an image of it. You don't need me to show it to you, but I just decided that we needed, before jumping into some more of the serious news, because we have quite a bit of that, I wanted to just share with you something that our team read right at the end of last week. And let me just read the headlines from CBS News. Sharks in the Bahamas test positive for caffeine, painkillers, and even cocaine. Now, this is a real study, just so you know. This is real news. It actually happened. It's actually a research paper where marine biologists and scientists analyzed the blood samples of 85 sharks of different species off the coast of the Bahamas. They say they're the first ones to really find acetaminophen, so painkillers in these sharks. But unfortunately, cocaine has been found in sharks before. Didn't know that, by the way. There's a whole body of research, but apparently that's a thing. Might connect the dots for a few of us about some of the behavior that we see from some of these said sharks. I'm just going to throw it out there. These researchers say this is really important, though, because not only could it potentially impact the animal's health and behavior, but it tells us something about the quality of our water as well. There's all sorts of ways that these chemicals can get into the water supply, get into the ocean, whether it's just wastewater or otherwise. Use your imagination. We've all seen the stories of the, different packs sort of floating on the open water. We don't know. I know there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions, but I just thought this seems very emblematic of the year that we're having, where I can share a real headline that says that sharks are being found with painkillers and cocaine, and that's a real thing. So I believe it was just over 20 of those sharks out of the 85 were found with this in their bloodstream. So I'm just going to leave that right there. I feel like we've talked about why it matters, water quality, talked about how it could impact animal behavior, and where this goes from here, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but felt like something you should know. Conversation starter for your friends. If you feel like the, political conversations getting a little crazy over Easter, you just say, you know what, guys, I got a story for you. Sharks and cocaine. All right. Oh my gosh. Okay. That's enough of that. Let's get to the real news. How about that transition? We're talking a lot about what's going on in the waterways these days. You see how I did that? Because we're talking a lot about what's going on in the Middle East and related to Iran and the Persian Gulf, and especially because these waterways are so important to oil. So we're going to start there. I have a little bit of sound from the president. And in fact, Stephanie, if you don't mind throwing that in there, if we don't have it, that would be great. The president spoke as he was returning to the White House. And he gave what is a gaggle on Air Force One So he's giving a little bit of an update as to what happened over the weekend. And this often sets the news for the week ahead. These gaggles, if you think about bunch of birds together, it's a time that you get to throw commentary at the president. And it really can go in a lot of different directions. One of the things that the president talked about as he tried to kind of shift the topic away from Iran is he talked about the new ballroom at the White House and he showed a bunch of new renderings. So this is actually happening on the plane. He's holding up these renderings. And the press is like, yeah, that's interesting, Mr. President, but can we get back to Iran? A couple of things that he was asked about includes ground troops, what's happening with negotiations, and something very interesting he said about regime change. So that's something that we've talked about at the beginning of this conflict has been a major criticism of the United States in our previous foreign policy paradigms, which is the critique coming from our critics is that we want to put in our own leaders all over the world. We are colonialists, like going into these lands and trying to put our own leaders and make them little Americas. I mean, there's a lot of different critique of the United States because of that. And that's something that this administration has tried to ward off against to say, hey, no, listen, like we're not about regime change. We're trying to make Iran less of a threat to the entire world, but specifically to the United States as well, because they're the number one state sponsor of terrorism. We're really focused on that. What the president said this weekend was that he kind of veered into, it's kind of casual. The president talks sort of casually about regime change. He's like, well, the main leadership was killed in Iran. The second tier of leadership was basically killed. And now we got like this third tier of leadership and they're different. So this is kind of like regime change. This is some of what he talked about. So let's just take a listen to the president and I'll catch you on the other side of it.
See a deal in Iran this upcoming week?
I do see a deal in Iran, yeah.
Mr. President,
Could be soon.
are you considering still putting boots on the ground, and would you do that without going to Congress?
I just have lots of alternatives. We have tremendous numbers of ships over there. We don't need them though because of the power. Look, I would say we're just like we're ahead of schedule on the ballroom. In a much bigger way, we're ahead of schedule with Iran. We're weeks ahead of schedule. If you would have said that in 3 days we were going to knock out 158 ships, their entire Navy, which we did, we knocked out their entire Air Force. We knocked out most of their missiles. That's why you see missile attacks, but they're down to they're sputtering. And we have a group, it's really a new regime. It's a group of people that we've never dealt with before, that are acting very reasonable. It is truly regime change.
Is Khamenei's son still alive, sir? Is he a part of these
We think he may be. Nobody's heard about him. I mean, he may be alive, but he's obviously very seriously in trouble. He's seriously wounded.
You had offered that 15-point plan to Iran. Did they ever come back with
Yeah, they came back on the 15-point plan. They gave us most of the points. Why wouldn't they?
You make it sound like.
Okay, so that's it. Let's just hear a little bit more. Just that 15-point plan was proposed apparently by the United States to say this is what we need, the conditions in order for us to stop attacking. And so let's just listen to this quick follow-up question here.
Made some concessions. Can you identify those?
Well, they're agreeing with us on the plan. I mean, we asked for 15 things, and for the most part, we're going to be asking for a couple of other things. And just to prove that they're serious, they gave us all these votes. When I talked about 4 days ago a present, I said they gave me a present. But I didn't think I was at liberty to say what it was. What it was 8 plus 2. It's 10 massive boatloads of oil. And today they gave us another present. They gave us 20 boatloads of oil. That starts being shipped tomorrow. We're having very good meetings, both directly and indirectly, and I think we're getting a lot of very important points.
Sir,
So I think it's important for you to hear from the president on the record. So while you're hearing what the president is saying, which is optimistic about negotiations, he's talking about these large cargo ships being able to move in this important waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, that very narrow channel that Iran is really policing and making impossible for these boats to move through. While that's happening, we're also having some other indicators. So we're getting, for example, the Houthis as a terrorist group out of Yemen, also funded and supported by Iran, attacking Israel. The Houthis have done that before over the last several years, especially since the terrorist attack of October 7th in solidarity with Hamas. And so now we have the Houthis involved. So that would be escalatory. You have America moving more troops to the Middle East. The New York Times gave us some good context today. So if you see more headlines about troops moving. Know this: we have roughly approximately 40,000 American troops in the Middle East on any given day or time. It sort of depends on what ships are in the region too. Obviously, there's ebbs and flows in that, but typically during a regular time, we could have 40,000 troops in the vicinity. So right now, it's estimated that we have around 50,000 troops. So that's 10,000 more than usual, and that's why there's questions about, well, why are those troops there? What could be the next step? So that could also be looked at as escalatory. We continue to see a lot of rocket fire exchange between Israel and Lebanon. Hezbollah is the most militarized armed terrorist group in the Middle East, and it's supported by Iran. Despite what's happening, these terrorist groups are still active, and Israel is responding as well, attacking certain areas in Lebanon. So there's also the argument, while the president is painting an optimistic picture of a potential deal, there's also the potential that this becomes more escalatory. I think it's important that you know both things are on the table. Deanna actually just brought up something that was really important. She said while we were in the pre-show, it came through that NATO just intercepted an Iranian ballistic missile aimed at Turkey. So let's just take a look at that. Over the last little bit of time, we have seen that there have been some missiles fired at Turkey. And this is what Turkey is saying, that NATO defenses downed the fourth inbound Iranian missile. Why does this matter? So we have seen Iran unleash their fire across the Middle East, including at countries that maybe weren't necessarily expected, but had a certain relationship with the United States. So before we had this conflict, there was a question: would Iran actually try to strike Saudi Arabia? Like, would Iran actually try to strike in places in the UAE? Like, what would would Iran try to strike the Dubai airport? Now we have an answer to that, which is in this conflict, Iran has fired and hit these particular targets across the Middle East. This is also an escalatory action. Turkey is different, though. If Iran is successful in hitting Turkey, which is a NATO ally, we could be in a completely different situation because NATO is the largest military alliance in the world. It includes most of Europe, as well as Turkey. And so because of our mutually agreed upon alliance that we have through NATO, that means that there's the doctrine of collective defense, which is if one of us is attacked, then we all go to fight. So if Turkey is attacked, then what does that mean for the alliance? Do you see the reluctant France or England or Spain, even, who's been very outspoken about this conflict, pulled in more directly? Like, what does that look like? So these are the things that are floating on the table right now. We have potential optimism coming from the White House about a deal. We also have some signs that we could see more escalation. Where it goes from here, not quite sure. But in the meantime, we're seeing some real effects of this in everyday life. Robin, one of our insiders, wrote me and said that she paid $70 for a full tank of gas. And Robin, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, it's not a new car. So she was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? She's in California. Remember, every state has different taxes, different fees that are attached to when you fill up. So that's why we all pay something different for a gallon of gas. And that's why when you see a national average, you're either like, whoa, that's high, or whoa, that's low. It depends on where you live. So for Robin in California, she's seeing the effect of oil prices going up. And what I'm showing you on the screen now is what we've seen over the last several weeks. So when people say, hey, oil's going up, you might say, all right, but when you see a graph, you can see that the line is very steep. This is just a frozen moment in time from today. By the way, the oil prices could have changed already and likely have. But these oil prices being high have affected the broader market as well, because you have to look at oil as something that's so important to every part of our economy that when the price goes up, it affects every single little thing. It could affect the price of a grape, because that grape has to get to the grocery store. It affects the price of fuel that you're putting in your car. That seems more straightforward. So it's in every part of the economy, and that raises concerns for the American consumer and how much the American consumer will end up shopping, which is a really big deal because our consumer activity is so important to the global economy. So it's not just about what's happening here, it's also about the impact globally as well. And we're seeing a reaction in the markets because of that. So let me show you what's going on with the Dow Jones. This is just one of the indices that we look at. S&P 500, NASDAQ, Dow Jones. But I wanted to pay attention to what happened just on Friday, where we saw a big decline in the Dow Jones, and you're hearing this term correction. Hey, the markets are in correction or in a correction territory, or they've fallen into correction. Like, what does that mean? It means that they're down 10% from their highs. So these are sort of arbitrary levels. Hey, a market falls like 1 or 2%. That's significant. Like, we would pay attention to that. The markets have been a lot more volatile over the last several years. So a swing of 1 and 2%, 10, 15 years ago was a really big deal. Now we've seen that quite a bit. But if you see the markets fall from 10%, that's like a sign of, wait a minute, things are on the decline, right? They're not only are they falling, they're staying lower. And then after a correction period, we're either going to see the markets rally out of that correction or fall further. If markets fall further, they could fall into bear market territory, which would be 20% off the highs. So that's also something that we'd be watching for. We're not there yet, but I just want you aware that this market volatility is happening. You could see some of these headlines cross and be like, what's this about? Correction? Something's going on with the markets. Why are the markets this way? A lot of this has to still do with uncertainty in the Middle East, the oil prices moving higher, not really seeing, while being talked about, that there could be some sort of pause to the fighting, not enough to reassure investors right now. And one note about what the president said there about ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz, there's been some difficulty confirming which ships these are and exactly how they're flowing through the Strait of Hormuz and what route they're taking. It appears, according to some reports, that some of these cargo ships, are those that are most friendly to Iran and are hugging the shoreline of Iran very closely. That's much different than traffic being open. So the details here matter, and that's where we sit, at least on Monday. In the meantime, I just thought it would be important to mention this to you, and it's going to take us off path just slightly, just for a second. But as all of this is happening in the Middle East, something else is happening with the markets, and you might have heard a lot about artificial intelligence over the last several weeks. It's been a topic of conversation, obviously, for the last several years, but we're hearing more about it. There's more, it seems like there's, I don't want to say more excitement. It seems that there's more adoption of AI in a lot of different ways. I'm sure you're seeing this across social media, people giving you tips about how to use it. Like, suddenly things have sort of changed again, where maybe this conversation was happening more in the business world. Now it's happening more in a consumer area. And this is the question of how it gets adapted to everyday life, as much as it's a question about how it's adapted to the business world. Just a term that you might hear is SaaS. So SaaS isn't just the SaaS that you might get from somebody. SaaS is software as a service. Different type of SaaS, okay? Software as a service. And some of these large software companies are the ones that have been talked about a lot related to artificial intelligence, because AI seems to change the game when it comes to software so fast. So they're the ones that are kind of on the front lines of being impacted by this potentially. Now, one of the podcasts that I listened to, as I've talked to you about, is a bunch of investors, guys from a lot of different backgrounds, political perspectives. They started this podcast during the pandemic. It's become kind of a big deal, especially in the business world, called the All In Podcast. And it's a group, it's like the Beatles. There's everybody has a little different tune that their instrument they're playing. One of the folks that's part of this group is a man called Chamath Palihapitiya. And he was talking about AI in their last episode that came out late last week. And just to set this up, because I think this is just important to be aware of. We don't know if this is impacting the market that you're seeing today in front of you per se. That's a lot about what's happening in the Middle East and our news cycle. But there's a question about how is AI raising big questions about the price and worth and value of companies that haven't necessarily been thought of that deeply before. When someone's investing, and this is how Chamath sort of set this up, he said, you're making a guess. This company, I think, is going to be worth quite a bit. So I'm going to invest this much money. Or I think this company is going to be worth 10x in 15 years. So I'm going to invest. Everyone's sort of guesstimating based on what they know exists. But AI is this whole new area of unknown, and it's challenging us all to think about, well, how does that affect the value of things? This is very short, but I think understanding this is some of the philosophical questions that are coming up is important.
There's this super intelligence on the horizon. I think it's fair to ask the question, what is anything worth? And what is anything worth in year 10 or year 15 or year 20? Because if you have infinite abundance and you have all this creativity, won't all companies be disrupted? And won't we be in this constant churn of everything getting disrupted all the time? And if you were faced with that problem in the public markets, how would you react? And I think the canary in the coal mine are the SaaS stocks. Yes, we jokingly call it the SaaS apocalypse, but I think it's much more important. I think it's a big societal question. How do you view capital markets? How do you view the health of a company in a world where we've been told there's a superintelligence on the horizon that makes everything much more fragile than it was before?
I think that's just an interesting thing to be aware of, to have on your radar. Barbara is saying on her live chat, I love this, Barbara, that your husband used AI for one of his NCAA brackets and apparently wasn't that successful. So AI doesn't know everything, doesn't know, it can't predict the future. However, this may be the first year that Barbara's husband used chat to figure out what his brackets are. So let's just exponentially move that into some of these broader decisions about what does the future look like and how do you move as a company and how do you invest and what does it mean for the stock market? And we're in a real period where one wonders, are we on the precipice of this whole new world? I was thinking about that this weekend and thinking, well, what could you compare this to? Would it be like the printing press? Like the sudden appearance of the printing press that changed everything when books could be printed and then things got cheaper so more people could get access to books? Is this the same as when suddenly we got the internet or email or text? Like, what could we compare it to? Because certainly there was fear during those times too. And then there was evolution. But in that period, there's a lot of uncertainty. And the whole point of bringing this up to you is that you may feel the uncertainty from the news. And I certainly feel it too. The unknown is part of so many of our news stories right now. Volatility, the uncertainty of the future, that's a very real thing. It's not imaginary. It's not overly emotional. It just is where we are right now at this chapter. So that's where we're sitting. In the meantime, we do have things that are happening that could also be complete platonic shifts in major industries that have nothing to do with AI. And I want to share that with you now because we have some absolutely blockbuster rulings in court that have now set legal precedent that could change the way that these massive social media companies that have such an impact on our lives operate in the future. These rulings came down last week because of everything that's happening in the news. They didn't get a lot of attention. And I want to spend a little time on them today because so much of how we're interacting is through social media, whether it's finding businesses that we want to invest in or places that we want to shop. A lot of our commerce is happening there as well. At the same time, there's a rise of concern over social media, specifically for our youth. But let's be honest, we know what we're seeing in our children or younger adults is just a small portion of what we're probably seeing in ourselves. They're just minors. And so we're adults walking around thinking that we have everything under control. But as you know, as an adult, we really don't. That's just kind of a lie. We think we do sometimes, but most of the time we're just trying to do our best. But for those that are the most vulnerable, those where we can see that society and the law should protect, this is where we're seeing a lot of tension with social media companies really come to fruition. And it may be just the beginning between other tension. When someone is an adult, it feels like they can make their own decisions. They have to make their own choices every day. For those that are being handed a device or given it one at school, that's a different situation. So let's talk about these two cases. We talked about them a couple weeks ago. They're very different, but there's some similarities. So two major lawsuits came to fruition against large social media companies, including Meta and YouTube. One case was in California, one case was in New Mexico. The case in California was different in that there was an individual. There was a young woman that said she had been harmed by these social media companies. And she was taking this case, which was a civil lawsuit against these companies in a new and creative way. We're going to get to that in a minute. In New Mexico, it was the New Mexico Attorney General, so the state's attorneys that were filing this civil lawsuit against the social media platforms. And so they did something a little different. One of the things that they did, and one of their claims in New Mexico, was that Meta violated New Mexico consumer protection laws by knowingly misleading consumers. That's the key, knowingly misleading consumers about the safety of its platforms. So one of the things that they did is they decided to go undercover and they tried to operate in these social media webs in a way that would be like a young adult. And they saw what they believe were the lack of protections that were intentional and that were misleading to families. And this is part of how they built their case. So there was some undercover work in New Mexico. In the California case, it was a little bit different. Let me explain. The plaintiff is arguing that there was a defective design to these platforms. And by the way, she took on all of them. It wasn't just Meta and YouTube, it was also Snap and TikTok. Some of the social media platforms like TikTok and Snap decided to settle. They're like, we're not going to do it. We're not going to deal with this. No. However, Meta and YouTube were part of the case that went to trial. And as I was doing some research this weekend, what I thought was interesting is that some reporting suggested that these social media companies really felt like there was no way that they were going to be found guilty, that they have been able to stand behind a very specific law that you have likely heard about, but it doesn't just roll off the tongue. It's Section 230. So Section 230 dates back to the 1990s. And basically what it does is to protect social media companies from being liable for what people post. The social media companies have the empowerment to have their own policies that they can enforce. So for example, if someone crosses over that policy and they see that person, they could ban that person or they could hide a comment. They have some ability to moderate because they do have policies that they can enforce. Section 230 enables that to happen too. But if they don't catch someone doing a criminal act, they're not liable for that. So that's there's been all sorts of debates about Section 230 about whether or not it needs to get updated, and it hasn't yet. So the social media companies will feel like they have that to stand behind, and previous legal precedent has proven that to be the case. They're protected against, someone does something really evil or bad, they are, according to this law, not liable for what happens in the aftermath of that. But what the lawyers did in these cases was different. So in New Mexico looked at the state's consumer protection law and said, you guys are violating this. And then in California, the plaintiff's lawyers said, hey, this is intentional defective design. Things like infinite scrolling, AI algorithms, they're harmful. It's not the content. Wait a minute. Whoa. It's not the content. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what you guys are doing, social media companies, that is creating something that is defective. So that's what we're not talking about, the actual material. We're talking about how you are operating your business. And in both of these arguments, New Mexico and California, a jury found in the side of those that were challenging the social media companies. So ruled in favor of the state of New Mexico and ruled in favor of the plaintiff in California. And these are cases that we've never seen before wind up with this sort of end result. And so the question here's why this matters. There are more lawsuits, 40 plus state attorneys generals have filed lawsuits against Meta, arguing something to the same effect that there's harm being done to children's mental health. They may have argued that in different ways. You better believe they're going to be looking at New Mexico and saying, yeah, like what they said. What they said is exactly what we're saying. Something similar here. You guys are violating consumer protection laws. What the jury found Meta liable for in the New Mexico case is misleading users about the safety of its platform. That's Facebook and Instagram specifically. Enabling child sexual exploitation, and ordered the company to pay $375 million in civil penalties. The jury concluded that Meta engaged in unfair and deceptive practices and knew, this is also key, knew about the risks to children, but failed to address them. So this is the successful argument in New Mexico. Meta obviously denies this and still says, and by the way, it's important to say Meta says they're going to be appealing these cases, so it's not the end of them, but it's certainly the beginning of a story here. So Meta says it's not legally responsible for user conduct. It cites Section 230. And it's actively investing in safety measures and does not engage in deceptive practices and is doing the best that it can. Like that's basically what Meta said. Like, listen, we're doing everything that as much as we possibly can here. But the jury did not say that, did not side with them. Here's the other part of this case, though. This is just the beginning of it. In May, so in another month, there's going to be the second phase of this case in New Mexico, and a judge is going to decide whether Meta created a public nuisance and could impose additional penalties and force platform changes to improve child safety. I mean, this could be, again, a watershed moment because yes, it's only in New Mexico, but if you have all these other cases coming in all these different states, and yes, these are huge billions and billions of dollars companies, but a $375 million civil penalty is not small. So imagine that 40x. That becomes something different for the company. So the question here is, what happens to these companies? What do they change? Let me just talk a little bit about California before we get to that. So when in California, a jury found that Meta through Facebook and Instagram and Google through YouTube, negligent for deliberately designing addictive platforms. Again, deliberately designing these platforms that harmed this young woman's mental health. The jury awarded her $3 million in compensatory damages, compensating her for what happened, and then an additional $3 million in punitive damage. So the penalty relates to the company. Finding that, and this is a quote, the companies acted with malice, oppression, or fraud. This is the jury. And this all has to do not with the content, but how they are operating their businesses. Similar to the New Mexico case, Meta and Google had very similar arguments. They said, listen, we're doing everything that we can. And in this particular case, they did have this argument, which is, hey, people are complicated. It's hard to know what actually led this individual, because the young woman said she was very depressed and she had all of these different ththings that happened to her, and she really attributed it to social media use. They said, listen, a person's a complicated constellation of events, and you can't just tie it to us. Like, that's not the only reason that she had these issues. But the jury did not love that argument and ruled against them. So this is the question. In the beginning of these cases, there was a comparison to what happened to cigarette companies so many years ago, when there was the argument, wait a minute, cigarettes are addictive, which is something we commonly accept now. And like the companies are trying to get these addictive drugs, recreational drugs, these legal drugs into the hands of young people on purpose, and doing this in a way that is bad for public health. I mean, this was really the argument, right? And in the aftermath of that, there was a huge change in how cigarettes were viewed. It wasn't the only thing. There was also more science and data that came that was like, hey, smoking's not great for you. You might want to consider something different. There was also the big labels that had to go into effect, or, maybe more requirements for how you can buy cigarettes. And so a similar question is being raised here. How does this change social media companies? I want you to think about this for a second. We are talking about minor users. So those, let's say under 18 and younger, perhaps 17 and younger, depends. Could it change something just for them, or does it change everything for social media companies in general? Does it require more parental oversight and guidance? Does it mean that everything has a warning label on it? What about this, though? The infinite scrolling has been something that's come up a lot recently. We call it doom scrolling, right? You get on, you get all these things just fed to you all the time. Gary Vee, this popular social media mogul, not even social media mogul now, has talked about this, that social media companies have moved from social media, us connecting because we like each other, to interest media, us just getting fed things that social media companies think that we like. And that's changed the world, because it's not really about connecting. It's about getting shoved more things in front of us. So you may think, okay, well, as I kind of play that, I'm like, okay, well, I'm kind of interested in like working out and good recipes, and I like to know what the latest fashion is. That doesn't really bother me that much. But if I'm in a certain loop, let's say a political loop, let's say I'm very progressive or very conservative, and that's what I'm looking at. And then what's being fed to me is more and more and more opinion. That is impacting how I'm viewing the world. That is impacting how I'm interacting in society. So what if that just went away? Let's just say that went away. How would that change how information was given to us, delivered to us, and how we interacted with it? Could be something very little as that, but what would that change? So this is really a big deal. I just think as someone that works in the media and has used social media as a way to spread the word about smarter news, this is so important to even how our company operates. So once upon a time at Smarter News on Instagram, we were growing a lot because people were recommending us to friends. We still have that a lot, thankfully. We appreciate that. But then there suddenly was a huge pause, and we realized that because we're not salacious, we're not having these outrageous commentary on the news, we're not getting recommended as much to other people because we don't really fit in a certain paradigm. Because why? Because nonpartisan is not a channel that has grown a lot on social media or at all. But people still really need, and they still really like, and from different political perspectives still seek out. But we have noticed in the last, I would say 2 to 3 years that just it's so hard to grow. It's so hard. And maybe, listen, maybe I just need to do better content. Okay. I need to take accountability for that. Maybe I just need to do better social media content. Absolutely. Totally. Could be personal accountability. But I noticed it was a sea change. And so one just has to ask the question, if there's a slight shift in policy, how would that change the way that we're interacting with social media from this point on, similar to the way to how people interacted with cigarettes? What's the comparison? What do you think about that? I'm very curious. So I don't want that, to me, is one of the biggest stories, because as we're looking at any story in the news, a lot of what you're seeing about that story depends on how these algorithms are working. Let me give you an example. I haven't touched what's happening with the partial government shutdown with the Department of Homeland Security. Let's just pause there for a second. The shutdown is continuing. Lawmakers have gone home. They're not expected back in DC for about 2 weeks. This doesn't look like it's going to get solved anytime soon. That means Immigration and Customs Enforcement will remain at the airport. It means that TSA will start getting paid because of an executive action by the president. And there still is money for Immigrations and Customs Enforcement through a previous bill that has been passed. So it's not that there's a total empty on the gas tank, but certainly parts of the Department of Homeland Security are not getting funded as they typically would be at a time where America is at war. Why is this happening? There's just a lack of agreement. There's a lack of compromise. I mean, we could get into the dirty details of it all. The Senate thought that they had a plan, passed it over to the House because they made a change to what the House had passed a few weeks earlier. So it had to go back to the House. And the House said, no, we're not going to do it. Why not? Why did Republicans balk at something that was also passed by Republicans? There's just a real resistance to try to strip funding from Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. What Republicans say is that's taking money away from law enforcement. It's like defunding the police, and they won't do it. Different Republicans have different points of view on that. And so they're not aligned on what they're willing to accept or temporarily fund or not fund. And so that's part of the reason we're in this situation. But the other side of it is, even though Republicans have the majority in the House and the Senate, they can't really pass anything without the Democrats because of how close these margins are. And Democrats have been very clear, they're not funding the government if there's not actual reform in some of these areas related to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So each side is blaming each other. And you may ask, well, which side has the right, answer to this? I would ask you that question. We're now at one of the longest shutdowns in the history of the United States of America. Does either side look like a winner to you? Is either side coming out on top here? Does either side have a leg to stand on? I'm curious your thoughts on that. But imagine how you're seeing that story on social media, because depending on maybe what news sources you're looking at, you're getting very different opinions of that. And it's getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced and reinforced because that's the way the algorithm is working, because of the infinite scrolling. And infinite scrolling, by the way, is just your ability also just to scroll forever, because we know we can do that. Technically, that's possible. So I think this is a very big story. I don't know where this goes from here. And both stories, by the way, what's happening with social media and partial government shutdown, I think both are really big stories. I don't know where either goes. I think both of them also are setting precedent. So legal precedent in the cases of social media. And every time we go a little bit longer into a shutdown, it then moves the goalposts for what the next shutdown could look like. And because you know that every single year we're going into these periods of these partial funding periods, we're always up against a little bit of a timeline for another shutdown. And it's very unique to the US government, because if you look at other companies or, other institutions, not just companies, obviously the government's not a company, but what I think is why this matters is that we're not operating with a budget. We haven't in many years. We've been able to operate, for 6 months or 9 months at a time. And when we're talking about real financial concerns in America, we don't have that ability to plan because we don't have these large budgets that are being passed where everybody gets behind. This is what it looks like for defense spending. And this is what it looks like for space spending, or this is what it looks like for entitlement spending. So that is a problem that continues, and it doesn't have a solution anytime soon. That's really the bigger issue. I'm not minimizing what's happening with DHS But that's actually the bigger issue here. Speaking of space funding, let's talk a little bit about that. We have, when I said again, this week could change everything, it could actually change everything when it comes to space. Because right now it does look, at least at this moment, I mean, it's noon on Monday, right at this moment, it looks like we could see the launch of Artemis and Artemis II specifically. And why are we in this situation where we're trying to figure out how to send astronauts back into space, specifically around the moon? We've certainly sent astronauts into space to the International Space Station, but this is different. How did we wind up here? It actually has a lot to do with funding. If you go back to the 1970s, there was a real concern about the space program for all sorts of reasons. One is risk. There was a concern about risk, but there was also a concern about investment. There was a lot happening in the world, and those in power were thinking, wait a minute, is this really the priority for the American people? This is expensive, sending people to the moon. Should we still do it? Maybe we should think about it. That's actually part of the conversation. And that's one of the reasons why this program, the moon program, did not continue. So now we're trying to pick that up about 50 years later, and America's trying to get back out to the moon faster than anybody else. And there is a space race happening here. I want you to think about it. If you wake up tomorrow, we think Artemis is going to launch on Wednesday, but instead you got China on the moon. How different would the world look suddenly when you think to yourself, that's something that America has been able to do? So why does Artemis matter? Let's talk a little bit about it. It's the furthest that humans will travel into space. We've been pretty far. We're going to go a little bit farther because we're going to go around the moon. And one of the things that we're going to do, I'm going to show you a little animation that we have here. There's a few of them that I'll try to show you. It can be a little dark because it's dark in space, but I'll try to put these in the show notes too, so you can pull them up because it is pretty interesting that we're able to see like how this is supposed to happen. So Artemis II is going to launch. Let me see if I can get it a little bit bigger. So it's going to be a 10-day mission. And the whole point of Artemis is that we're going to go to the moon and around it. We're not going to land on the moon. But this is the whole point of this, is that we want to get back on the moon. And why do we want to get back on the moon? It's not just because we want to prove that we can do it. It's also because we want to create a permanent space for Americans on the moon. It'd be a working area. This is something that NASA actually talked about more specifically last week as well. So that here, this different animation where we see Artemis going around the Earth, and then it's going to be shooting out. There's a lot of technology that's going to happen here. I'm hopefully going to speak to someone that's going to be better than me in explaining it. Going around the moon, instead of using motors, we're trying to use some of the moon's orbit to sling us back into Earth. And so this is, very key to future missions to the moon. So it's the furthest humans will travel into space. The goal is constant human presence on the moon. I would even amend that to say American presence on the moon. And it sets the stage for Artemis II. So we've had Artemis I. Now this would be Artemis II, Artemis III, and beyond. We're talking about getting to the moon, either with humans or without, and starting to set up that infrastructure that would allow us to stay there. This is the first time that we're going to be to the moon if and when this launches successfully since 1972. And all of the questions that have come up, in previous explorations are coming up here. What about risk and reward? What does this mean for America? What does this mean about America's global dominance? What does this mean for our competitors and for our adversaries? And what does this mean for the leverage that we have? But what does this also mean for humankind? Like, what is this? These are very big thoughts. I'm going to tie this back to our first story, though, as we talked a little bit about what is the impact of the war. Jared Isaacman, who is the head of NASA right now, was on Sunday Morning Futures over the weekend on Fox Business. And the first question was asked to him was trying to connect what's happening with Artemis and space and also national security. This is something we don't consider a lot. So here's his answer on that.
My job at NASA is certainly about the peaceful exploration of science and discovery in space. That said, certainly not lost on anyone that space is the ultimate high ground. This is why President Trump created the Space Force during his first term. So you have observation satellites that are up there that can see, weapons that are being launched to provide early warning and then targeting of those weapons. You have communication satellites for command and control, as you described. So space is an incredibly important domain. That's why we are so grateful for the Space Force and their guardians that are looking out for us as we at NASA go out and explore the last great frontier.
I mean, it was something to think about, right? I mean, I don't think about the satellites that we're utilizing right now to keep us all safe and to keep us all working and to keep us all moving along. But that is part of space as well. And we don't want to forget about that. Yes, as Jared Isaacman was saying, he's not about what the Department of War is about. However, it is also certainly something to consider as America is looking to invest in space. And this is just one side of it. The astronauts have been in quarantine. They've been waiting. They can't get sick. One of them gets a cold, just like I did last week. That's not good. They're not going into space. This has been a long time coming. They've been preparing for this, the four of them. They were asked a very sweet question as part of their press conference over the last 24 hours. They're sitting, isolated from everybody. So they're getting these questions through teleconference. But I wanted you to listen to this one.
It is absolutely non-technical. The other night I was picking up some takeout food from Tai Tai in Cape Canaveral, and it was a crystal clear night. And I was looking up at the moon, and I don't normally think this way. I don't like the moon. I'm an amateur astronomer. I like it out of the sky so I can see the dim stuff. But I kept thinking about you guys saying, I couldn't imagine actually going there. I was trying to picture that in my mind as I was looking at the moon. So I hate to make this a long question, but could a couple of you just talk about it? You're bound to do the same thing, look up and have some thoughts. What are your thoughts as people who see the moon as a destination, not just a bright globe in the sky? Thanks.
Bill, one of the things you said right at the end of your question was, how do we feel as the people that can call the moon a destination, not just something we're looking at? And it is our strong hope that this mission is the start of an era where every person on Earth can look at the moon and think of it as also a destination.
Do you think of it as a destination? I mean, we got a couple good years left in us, guys. I mean, do you think this is a destination for you, for your family, for future generations of Americans? Maybe not in the ways that we would necessarily first imagine it, but moon-based is something that NASA has talked a lot about. This is part of the infrastructure that is starting to be put together to have a place that people could spend longer periods of time on the moon that then could lead to further exploration of the universe. So curious your thoughts on this. Is the moon part of your bucket list now? That's what we'll see potentially on Wednesday. A lot can happen. Now, quick note on this. There's been some, critique, I think, of the American public, unfairly, by the way, that you're not that interested in space. Okay. That the news isn't spending enough attention on space. And I actually think that's probably true. As a journalist, I think, that's probably true. I think it's probably because space can be a little complicated, a little technical, a little scientific. And, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot happening right in front of us. So it's tough to kind of pull ourselves away to these bigger missions. But there's also something that's very, very basic, which is it's very hard to tell people to get excited about something and then the date shifts. So, for example, the inauguration, a lot can happen in the world, but inauguration is going to happen. Super Bowl, a lot can happen in the world, but Super Bowl is probably going to happen. So you can get really excited about an event and everyone can sit down and watch it. And it's going to be this moment that's going to unify everybody. And we're going to watch this amazing thing. That's very hard to do for launches like this. Right now, the weather was suggesting about 80% success rate of a launch on Wednesday. That's if everything goes according to plan. It's really just the weather. So it's not confirmed. And the launch window could last for a couple more days, but it's uncertain. So on Wednesday, we could all be gathered around our phones and computers. I don't even want to say television. I know that sounds prehistoric, but let's just say we could be somewhere where there's a television on and we could be watching this miraculous thing together. Or it could be called off at the last minute. And that's it's tough to get excited about, right? So I want you to have some of the basics of Artemis. I'm very fascinated by this story and I want to learn more. I hope you do as well. But even for preparing for this week, how does it could happen. Maybe it doesn't. So this is part of what's also taking place. So if you're like, well, I saw a lot about that. And then I saw nothing. Well, that happened last time. Artemis was rolled out. It was getting ready to go. They were doing some tests. And then there was something that they found wrong. And they had to take it off its stand and redo that. So that was something everyone's getting excited about. And then we had to kind of pull back. So that's hard to do. So anyhow, it could be this week. As I mentioned, it could be a week that changes everything. And that's true of every week, but maybe particularly this week. So Jim says, I'd love to go to the moon. Okay, Jim, you're going to be our representative. All right. I need a moon correspondent, actually, if that's anyone is available for that. Real quick, I want to show you something really, really fast. Speaking of like attention spans, one of the things I missed when I was talking about social media is, as I mentioned, the cigarette comparison. Part of the kind of the resistance to cigarettes when suddenly these companies had to put warnings on their cigarettes and all sorts of things was the data, the research that came about that showed that that cigarettes were not as good. So people had a feeling, they were skeptical of companies, and this data came out that was like, man, smoking all the time is not that great, Probably shouldn't do it. So we're getting something similar with social media. I just want to show this to you because this was sort of shocking. This is showing us a survey of U.S. teens conducted late last year. And basically what it's showing is that there is a fair portion of teenagers, including 1 in 5, who say that they are almost constantly on social media. So YouTube, TikTok, you can see it through Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook. So when we're talking about living our lives, a lot of these teens are constantly living their lives on social media. And this is part of these kind of this public argument, but also these legal arguments about these companies taking different responsibility or being challenged by those legally because of the behavior or the impact that is coming after it. So it's not just the legal cases, it's not just public opinion, it's also research. We're seeing 33 states, over 30 states, ban or limit cell phones in classrooms. Like that wasn't the case a couple of years ago. But now there's a movement, there's an evolution. So maybe, just maybe, guys, we're going to be staring less at our phones and more at the skies. One could wish. Maybe. My husband has one of those great apps that my 6-year-old's like totally fan of, that you could point at the sky and it tells you all about the constellations. That's one area I can get behind that. See other stuff. It's the sneaky Sasquatch game that my 6-year-old can't do without sometimes. That's more of a problem. So very little sneaky Sasquatch in our household. Don't try it. Don't do it. A friend recommended it and it's good on a plane, but very little else. I'm curious, what rules do you have in your household? I need better rules for myself. My children don't have any screens. They don't have phones. They get the screens when they travel. And it's a great tool for that. That's very helpful, especially if you are at the airport or in a 3-hour TSA line. That's an example where maybe it could be helpful, but we'll see if things change a little bit though, too. That's where I am today as a parent, but anybody knows as a parent, things change. All right. Great to see everybody. Thank you so much for your support of Smarter News. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, please email me, scoop@smarternews.com. I love hearing from you. I love getting your voice notes too, because we include those in podcasts. It's a great way to sort of do a mock call-in show, but maybe we just need to do a regular call-in show because I think that would also be a lot of fun as well. But it's great to have you guys. Thank you for witnessing another period of history together. The week that changes everything. It could happen this week. I'll be curious to see what transpires, where we wound up on Friday, and we'll be there for you as we go throughout these developing stories. So have a great week wherever you are, and I'll talk to you soon. Always more at smarternews.com. Bye, guys.